It's the week ending Friday the 10th of February, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the longest A&E queues for 13 years. In the NHS, the judiciary standing up to President Trump, and Labour voting with the government on Article 50. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. The big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And with me today from the week's digital team are Ashley Wassall, Elizabeth Carr-Ellis and Jamie Timson. And to start the show with his top pick of the week, it is Ashley. What have you got for us?
This weekend's Superbowl was controversial, but not necessarily for what went on the field.
So beautiful for spacious skies, por tus olas de granos d'amber, yo piscina zakuti, sa ibabaw ng mga brutas.
Ugh. A commercial there for Coke featuring a multilingual rendition of America the Great. Millions saw it during this week's Super Bowl, Ashley. It's an advert. Why is that important?
Well, the Super Bowl is the biggest advertising showcase for corporate America. It costs $5 million for 30 seconds of advertising, reaching an audience of well in excess of 100 million.
Which makes podcast advertising seem very good value for money.
What's interesting, though, is that several companies, Budweiser, Airbnb, Coca-Cola, we just heard, a company called 84 Lumber, we're not familiar with them here, but they're very big in the States. They all chose to get very political with their advertising, and specifically, or so it was seen, very anti-Trump. They went with advertising that was very pro-immigration, very pro-multiculturalism, and it was widely perceived to be against the perceived or so-called Muslim ban and the wall between America and Mexico that he's proposing to build.
Except, I mean, to my ears, just hearing that clip of the Coke ad, I don't know what you guys think as well. I mean, that sounds like an incredibly patriotic advert of the type we'd never do in this country under any circumstances. And yes, okay, they've got lots of people from different countries singing about America. But is that really such a strongly political statement? I mean, isn't it just that everything's being seen through a lens of Trump or anti-Trump? And actually, that's just an advert for Coke of the type you'd have seen at any point in the last 5 years.
I remember the 1971, I'd like to give the world a Coke.
Great.
I mean, that was all about diversity, multicultural. It's exactly the same thing. Coke's just sending out the same message.
What's interesting here, though, is the fact that they all came together. And I mean, one of the ads in particular was 84 Lumber's advert had a Mexican mother and child walking up to a border wall, finding a big door in the wall which opened to reveal like a sunlit land of opportunity, and then
that was fairly clearly political. So I don't think there's much room
point
for
were they
dispute
aiming
there.
at with that kind of?
Well, interestingly, 84 Lumber's CEO says she voted for Trump and supports the wall. The argument is it's against the rhetoric that's come around since Trump, I think. It's against the xenophobia that's perceived to have been given a platform since Trump and since Brexit in this country, perhaps.
I saw the backlash with 84 Lumber was quite strong. There were lots of people who perhaps used 84 Lumber, which I believe is a construction company of some kind, who I imagine voted Trump, saying that they were getting rid of all of their orders and that 84 Lumber had made a big mistake, and lots of people took pictures of their cancelling their orders with 84 Lumber. I think that there is a big divide between companies like Airbnb and Coke, and maybe 84 Lumber's not the best idea, but like Budweiser, that have always done big ads, big interesting ads, big ads that are worth talking about, that are important for people to come around the water cooler effect thing to talk about their ads. And I think that this is just another line of that. And yes, maybe they are more political than they have been in other years, but at the end of the day, they're still trying to just sell their product and get people talking about them, which is the whole point of the ads in the first place.
There is often a political leaning to those ads anyway as well. This is not new for this year. You know, I've only ever watched the Super Bowl once, and it was when I was on holiday in Mexico. And because there were a lot of Americans staying in the resort where we were, they did a full-on sort of American-themed Super Bowl evening. And what I just didn't understand until I saw that happen in front of me was the ads are an absolutely integral part of watching the Super Bowl. They were cheering the ads. And when I was watching it that year, it was all about, for want of a better phrase, it was girl power. It was kind of the Michelle Obama movement to say, just because you're a girl doesn't mean you can't achieve things, doesn't mean that you have to walk like a woman and all this stuff. And almost every ad had an element of that kind of feminist rhetoric in it.
For the last year, it has been constant about refugees and what's been going on from Syria. So while they may have been political, they weren't necessarily anti-Trump, because they would have been made and planned many, many months in advance.
Airbnb said publicly that they came up with their ad on the Thursday before the Super Bowl.
Really?
Actually, that's been disputed. They ran a very similar ad last November when they were facing claims of discrimination, but that's a different matter. There was a company that ran an ad that aired locally in the Washington, D.C. area that just had a Trump impersonator trying to sell, I think it was Cyprus fireplaces, and they were 80% off, so they had Trump making a joke about, it's cold in Washington, almost as cold as in Russia. Ha ha ha. There was quite a lot of specific stuff, and I think that's what's different here. It was specific and policy focused, a lot of the ads.
Well, except Coke just repeated their ad from 2014 as well.
But why choose to rescreen that ad? Normally they would spend millions on a new ad, so why choose to rescreen an old ad that is explicitly multicultural?
There was a great study in the Conversation that was released, I think, maybe a couple of days ago, that basically looked at what effect being political has on companies and making a stance, and whether or not that made people more interested in them, or more behind their drive. And the concept behind it is that consumers today form relationships with a company based not only on the quality of the products and the services, but also on a set of expectations about how it should conduct its business. And so you get behind a kind of ethos that they give, and if they don't follow those expectations, then suddenly we're backing away from them. And I think the big obvious example is the Trump ban with Uber and Lyft. And so
talk us through that.
So when they had the Muslim ban at JFK Airport, or the supposed Muslim ban at JFK Airport, the taxi drivers, yellow cab taxi drivers at JFK, took part in a 1 hour protest where they refused to take anyone from the airport. Uber, in a slight oversight, thought, hang on a minute, we want to be on the side of this. We're going to get rid of our surge pricing, which is where you pay extra if there's a more demand, so you pay extra because there's more people wanting to use the service. They got rid of the surge pricing so that they wouldn't be kind of outed as being like, oh look, Uber's trying to make loads of money out of the Trump ban. But of course, by doing that, they brought attention to the fact that they weren't taking part in the ban themselves. So people were like, this is ridiculous, why are they not taking part in the ban? Like, this isn't why I wanted to get Uber. And they deleted, people across the world started deleting their Uber apps. And Lyft, which is the Uber competitor, jumped on the bandwagon, for want of a better phrase, and said that they were going to donate money to ACLU, which is the kind of pro-refugee legal aid kind of aspect to it.
Ashley.
It doesn't help as well that with Uber that their CEO sits on an economic advisory panel for Trump.
Step down.
He stepped down after that boycott happened and people started deleting their accounts. So they, in a sense, they had closer ties to Trump than just that surge pricing thing.
And what about this business of companies that make products like beer and Coke having a political allegiance at all? Wouldn't it be better for them to stay out of politics completely?
Well, this is kind of why I brought the subject up, actually. I actually think this is a good reason to defend the free market. This is in theory what the free market gives us. It's absolute choice. So rather than someone telling us what to buy or something having, just being endorsed in some way by the state or whatever the alternative is, in this case, we have the power. We can choose to shop at retailers or buy products that suit a value system. So in the same way that we can shop at Sports Direct, or we can choose not to because they treat their workers badly, we can shop at Lego because they make a stand over which newspapers they're going to advertise with. Similarly, we can buy products from companies that have a similar political allegiance or that stand against what they see as a
we can, but what I'm saying is if you ran one of those companies, wouldn't it be better just not to get involved? Wouldn't it be better for your policy to be, we make a nice fizzy drink?
I think countries have long gone from that. They have to take a stand, because people expect them to take a stand. If a company is investing in a third world country and not paying its staff well, there's going to be an outcry at that. So that company has to make a stand on it. So it's the same thing. They have to show where their political allegiance lies.
I think as well, it's an aspect of people want the companies that they buy from to reflect their political stance and lean point and standpoint. What am I saying?
Okay, so on that point, I don't want to generalise, but people on Twitter have. Budweiser's basically drunk by rednecks, isn't it? Or at least that's their brand. Like, you would think in a Venn diagram of Trump supporters and Budweiser drinkers, there'd be some overlap there. So whatever they feel corporately, the fact that their business was set up by an immigrant and they wanted to make this emotional advert, which seemed to be anti-Trump, that doesn't make sense to reflect the customers that are choosing their brand.
In America. And remember, the biggest audience for these ads isn't actually during the Super Bowl. They've got an audience of 100 million. That's why they pay that money. They made this ad. They make a longer version of it usually, and they release it a week before on YouTube, where it's getting and still getting millions of views. Anheuser-Busch is a global company. It's actually headquartered in Belgium now, of all places. Yeah. And it's got brands all over the world. In fact, America is by no means its largest market anymore. So I actually think this goes far beyond the demographics it might sell to in America.
Okay, Elizabeth, you're up next. What have you brought with you today?
I'm going to let my clip speak for itself.
It's been more than a year since Jason recorded his voice. 21 men from Yorkshire have become donors and read out the 400 phrases needed. Now Jason's back in Edinburgh to hear his blended and synthesised voice for the first time. But will it sound like him?
So I'll let you test it out then.
Using eye movements, Jason selects letters on his computer to type out what he wants to say. It can be slow, but predictive text helps.
This is the first time I have heard my new voice.
That's pretty good. that is, yeah.
That was from this week's edition of BBC local programme Inside Out for Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. You can find it on the BBC iPlayer, though. And it featured Jason, a man with motor neurone disease, using a synthesised version of his own voice, complete with accent. Elizabeth, why have you brought us this?
I love this story. What I really liked about this story was earlier on you see Jason talking about how important his accent is for him. And he gets very emotional because he says his accent is who he is. It's where he comes from. It's what everybody knows him as being, this Yorkshire guy. And coming from the northeast and having to lose my accent, I just found this really resonated with me. It's a wonderful story, and it made me think about accents, especially because earlier this year there was a report saying if you have what's termed a regional accent, although everywhere in Britain is a region, if you have a regional accent, you're more likely to be paid less than somebody who has what's considered an English accent.
Which is sort of RP, I guess.
Yes, RP, BBC English, how the Queen speaks.
I'm interested in the phrase you just used, having to lose my accent.
Yes.
Explore that.
I discovered when I was 18 that having a Geordie accent, I was seen very much as being lesser to people because I spoke with an accent when I went to university. I went to university in Liverpool, and the first night I offered to buy everybody around. You know, what can I get yous? I said, using the plural yous, which is how we speak in the northeast. And they all burst out laughing because apparently this isn't what people from the south did. And when you have a huge group laughing at you when you're 18, you quickly learn you don't say yous again. You just say you.
So there's a harder, stronger Geordie inside you dying to get out? Or is your voice now, as it is, quite modulated, actually your real voice?
My real voice is quite modulated. When I go home and if I speak to people from the north, I relax. I can literally feel my whole body relaxing. And I speak a lot softer, and the Geordie comes back in. But when I'm away from home, then yes, I regulate and I modulate my language.
Okay, wow, interesting. All right. So the importance of accents as it relates to people with motor neurone disease is that for years now they've been able to give people with that disability a sort of computer-generated voice like Stephen Hawking.
Yeah.
And more recently, actually, I mean, Stephen Hawking says he likes his voice, doesn't he? But they've been able to give them, well, that kind of BBC RP voice you were talking about, or an American accent. But this is an unusual case in that they got people from the area that this man lives to record words so that he'd have his own feeling of his accent back.
It's not just that. He was diagnosed in 2013, I think, and his voice has degenerated quite a lot. So they've got him while he can still speak to say certain phrases and certain words. And what they do is they get donors, who includes his best friend, which I think is lovely, and the donors are from his region, so they can fill in the blanks. So it blends together to make a voice that sounds very much like Jason when he speaks.
I've actually got an interesting perspective on this as someone who's got an estuary accent, which is generic Southern but with less letters in our alphabet. And I actually hate my own accent. I spent years trying to actually sort of RP my own accent, as it were. Yeah. And I think the so-called regional accents, the outside London accents, or certainly the northern accents, have got so much more character. They're so much more interesting. I envy people like you, your accent. And I wonder if this perception that people are less intelligent if they come from certain areas or whatever you were alluding to is generational. Like the BBC, the Ruthian BBC, used to have a thing that everyone had to speak received pronunciation had to speak Queen's English. In 2013, Charlotte Green, who was an announcer on Radio 4, was made redundant, and she said they've stopped hiring people who do that now. And
yes, they have made efforts, haven't they, to change the kind of southern accent you hear, but you don't hear many Geordies.
But you have Stephanie McGovern, who is the Middlesbrough-born business reporter, and she says for a long time she was considered too common for the BBC.
Exactly. And what I'm saying is I think this is a changing issue. I think this is something actually where people of my generation don't see received pronunciation, Queen's English, London, posh accents as the...
BBC no longer holds that. The BBC isn't the pinnacle of broadcasting now, even in this country, even in the kind of poshest parts of this country. I would say that people are taking their media from lots of different places, and thankfully lots of different places now do have different accents. You know, Big Brother is obviously like such a go-to one for Geordie accents, but that has certainly become almost like a character piece. And you look at things like Gogglebox. Gogglebox has like the narration is done with accents, and also the people from around the country are obviously all different.
But there
accents.
is a slightly patronising tone, isn't there, to having employed Caroline Aherne and those Mancunian voices on Gogglebox. It's very much look at these plebs in their
It's
home.
a reference to the royal family, though, isn't it? Yeah.
Which isn't the most complimentary reference necessarily to the people who are being portrayed.
These are the normal people. The little people.
What's interesting, I think, and specifically in relation to this story, because the chap was from Yorkshire, I understand. Bath Spa University did a study in 2008. It was reported by the BBC. And they looked at a few accents, and what they compared was Birmingham, Yorkshire, received pronunciation, and silent. So they had, I think they had a load of supermodels or glam models, and they associated with them a number of statements, and then they got different control groups to ascertain how, firstly, attractive they found them, and that didn't change across the accents, and secondly, how intelligent they found them. And interestingly, the accent that came top on the intelligence score was Yorkshire, and the accent that came bottom was Birmingham. Birmingham came below silence, interestingly, which is what the article sort of led with. Regional accents in general aren't necessarily disliked. Maybe it's particular regional accents. The much maligned Brummie accent is actually quite tuneful to my ears. But
it's sort of inherently funny, though, isn't it? It does have its own sort of bathos to it, which other accents don't in the UK. So, Ashley, you posit that this is perhaps a generational thing, that attitudes are shifting. Do you think attitudes are shifting on this, Jamie, eventually? Do you think we'll still be having this conversation in 30 years' time?
I think that, no, I think they certainly are changing. I think that I am more aware of regional accents in my sphere of influence and coming through. I'm probably not the best person to make comments on accents coming from London, but I do feel like there's more of a push to include different voices and not necessarily just stereotypes across the media that I take in. You know, BBC Three or Channel 4 now has a variety of different accents.
And what do you think, Elizabeth, since you brought this up?
I don't think it's changed. I do think it's changing. I think accents are changing, but they're changing in that they're being influenced by what's being seen on TV. For example, Kardashians, so you now get people talking like that and going up at the end, or talking with that horrible fry, it's called, vocal fry, where you have to speak like this. So yeah, it is changing, but not in a regional way. I think it's becoming more homogenized.
What about there's a political angle to this, though, surely, as well. If a lot of the major political events are going on, telling us anything, it's this anti-elitism thing. That's what we keep hearing everywhere. And the way that manifests itself in this country is anti-London, anti-being posh, anti from the southeast.
And yet somehow in the form of Nigel Farage, which doesn't seem quite right, does it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I don't know, I get the sense at the moment there is a bit of a backlash against being posh, speaking well, coming from the southeast. And that surely is going to filter its way into public consciousness in the years to come.
Jamie, you're going to close the show. What do you think this week is going to be remembered for?
The truth behind my favourite conspiracy theory.
Stevie Wonder at LAX. So he is fueling the fire that his vision is better than he's been making out. There's word that maybe him and his family would have some sort of reality show.
It's too invasive.
Oh, you're not going to do the reality show? I heard that you were.
No.
And I'm like, but you could be like the Kardashians. And he goes,
I could make a lot of money, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Buy me a few planes and be able to fly them.
Oh, wow. You'd fly them yourself?
I flew a plane once actually twice.
What?
No. Yeah.
How'd you go?
Actually landed the plane.
No, he's kidding you. And I go, are you going to come out one day and go, surprise, I can see? And he goes,
and this year, I would reveal the truth.
Oh.
Even in audio form, those jump cuts make me feel sick. TMZ there, reporting on this very, very bizarre rumour that resurfaced this week that Stevie Wonder may not be blind. Jamie, why are you bringing this tawdry filth onto our show?
It is without doubt, my favourite conspiracy theory. When I found out about it, that there was a few videos, I have to say, not just one single video, that show Stevie Wonder apparently with the ability to see. One particular one is he's performing with Paul McCartney. It's coming to the end. Paul McCartney brushes past the mic stand that Stevie Wonder is standing next to. It falls. Stevie Wonder definitely looks down with his head and puts out his arm to catch the mic stand. Something
People
which is
who are
beyond...
partially sighted can do that.
Well, but
they get used to using all their other senses. They can feel movement and air and stuff like that, and they may have a very slight vision.
According to his own recollection, he's never been able to see, and so this would be quite something if he could catch things falling through midair. I would say.
Are you seriously saying that you're saying it's your favourite conspiracy theory?
Yes.
Are you seriously saying that you are someone who is inclined to believe that for the past 6 decades of his career, when there's no tangible benefit to a young black boy from Motown pretending to be blind, that he was faking it?
People thought the world was flat.
Elizabeth, can you try and dignify this?
I actually think there is a lot of benefit to being a young black boy and being blind, because you have the, oh, bless.
Not when you're embarking on a mainstream pop career. I mean, it might seem that way now because of Stevie Wonder.
He started off as
He would have had to have had incredible foresight.
But he started off as little Stevie Wonder.
He did.
He was just a wee boy. It would have had
Ashley,
a lot of
rescue me,
resonance in that
please.
time.
This is obviously crap.
Thank you.
That's not to say there isn't a point to the idea that someone, by having some kind of hook, can't get a benefit from that. There's examples throughout artistic history. Van Gogh had his depression.
What?
Not
Van Gogh had his depression? I don't think he was using it as a marketable asset.
It was a weird hook, but it worked.
But in retrospect, it might make him a bit more interesting.
I think it's crap. The conspiracy theory is crap. But I think that there is some value in someone having a hook.
How do people get through on the X Factor if it's not for the sob stories?
Yes, but Stevie Wonder wasn't on the X Factor. He is an unassailable legend of music. And why is this story coming up now?
Well, so I think the idea is that he perhaps has always enjoyed the question over his site. Like he has playful humour with people like the TMZ.
Can we call it gallows humour, though?
But he has a great sense of humour.
Yeah.
For instance, when he reading out an award at the Grammys, and it was in Braille, and he said, "Oh," and he showed the camera, and he was like, "You can't read this because you can't read Braille," which was all obviously part of the trick. But,
yes, of course.
But he obviously has some humour behind it. But I think there is there's a wider question about how...
I can't imagine where we're going here. What's the wider question?
Wait for it. I think the wider question is how we look at the art based on the artist. So some people would say that they perhaps enjoyed Stevie Wonder's art and also had some kind of soft feeling towards him because he was blind. But can you ever really separate what he creates? Basically, if this is true,
right?
If he is a big fraud, does that affect his output? Like, would you, as a listener, be like, "Oh God, he's made up being blind for 60 years. That does make me feel a little bit worse about."
It's a different kind of. I can't believe we're actually having a serious conversation about this. It's a different kind of fraud, isn't it, to say Lance Armstrong taking drugs? Because, Stevie Wonder wasn't saying, "I'm the best because I'm blind."
Yeah, but look at David Beckham this week. So people are now judging David Beckham because of these leaked emails.
Because he may have done charity work because it might have benefited him at the possibility of getting
and also the way that what he said about Catherine Jenkins.
But that's fine. But
that would also make people judge David Beckham now.
Yes, but correctly, if that's true, because it's possible that he did do the charity work because he might want a knighthood. But with Stevie Wonder, no one's saying he actually did the music and made the music because he was blind, are they? Or to attract listeners because he's blind? I mean, it is just good music, isn't it? It's not about being blind.
I think that's the difference here, isn't it? I mean, Living in the City is a great song. It's not a great song because it was sung by a blind man. Beethoven's Fifth is a great piece of music. It's not a great music because it was made by a man who was... And incidentally, he's not deaf. He wasn't deaf, sorry. He only went deaf in the last...
Everyone's faking it.
What's interesting to me is more the mythology gets associated with it as a postscript and why it gets associated with it. So why are people so fascinated by Stevie Wonder's blindness? Even though the reason he's famous is because he made undeniably great music.
We like our artists to be tortured, though.
Precisely
They
that.
can't
That's
just
what's interesting.
When they're kids, they've got to have a lovely, lovely life. So Britney had to be all nice and shiny when she was Disney. As soon as she turned 17, 18, she could go off the rails completely, and we loved her for it.
And we love people with a very difficult background. You know, you talked about the X Factor. People, everyone has to have a dead wife or problems with their job, or those single mothers or whatever. There's all sorts of sob stories, and we love the tortured artist thing. It's something to make them a celebrity, to make them interesting, but I don't think it affects their art. I think Stevie Wonder was rightly famous because he made great music.
Is the art affected by how people see the person?
I think his celebrity is affected by it,
but not the art itself.
So I think people enjoyed the music, and then the blindness became something that became associated with him, and that became an aura around him, and he as a celebrity has now become so intrinsically linked to that disability.
Yeah.
But I think he would have been famous anyway. I mean, we've got more people who are famous in the music business for not being blind than being blind. So, and they're not all getting famous because...
Well, he wrote most of the songs that he sings.
Indeed.
So even if some of his celebrity is based on his star quality around his disability, as a performer, he wrote those songs. Those songs are great songs, right? Can we at least agree that?
They are great songs, and I really think he's blind. I don't think he's been faking it for the last 60 years. If not, he deserves the Oscar.
Yeah.
He deserves the best Oscar.
What about that performance?
But I don't think it takes away from the music, but I think it takes away from how people view it. Chris Martin's a very nice middle-class guy, and I feel he doesn't get the recognition for his music that somebody who's clawed their way up from a working-class area would get for writing songs that they do. I'm not a Coldplay fan, by the way. I just like one or two.
I don't know. They sell out stadiums. I mean, he did the halftime show.
But he's not well respected. He's not well respected as a person.
They're not as credible as perhaps they might be if he was a tortured soul.
U2, for example.
Yeah. Maybe Bono's blind. He wears those glasses all the time.
He has a problem with the light, apparently.
Right.
Or does he?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think I have a problem with this conversation, so I'm going to wrap it up. That is it for this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Ashley Wassall, Elizabeth Carr-Ellis, and the conspiracy theory-believing Jamie Timson. For more from The Week, you need to visit theweek.co.uk, download The Weekday, which is our free iPhone app, or subscribe, of course, to the magazine. And don't forget to subscribe to this to hear brand new episodes of the show. As soon as it's available, just search for us, The Week Unwrapped, in your podcast app of choice. And by the way, if you do use iTunes, leave us a review. Why not? It all helps. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer, Matt Hill, at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week,